Deane Leonard is a guy that's played some good snaps here, has continued to progress. Like, you can tell that he's comfortable. You can tell that he's played. He can hold his own out there.
So we've all been hearing and seeing how well Asante Samuel Jr. has been playing this offseason in practices, but this is the first time that we have heard about Deane Leonard, and Jesse Minter said that he has developed in practices already and he is comfortable in his role as the outside cornerback. Now, that's great to hear. So after hearing this part of the interview, I went back and I watched every single snap that Deane Leonard played last year in the preseason and the regular season, and in 2022 in the preseason and the regular season. I even went back and watched some highlights of him in training camp last year and in 2022. This took a lot of time, obviously, but I wanted to get a good feel for the kind of player that he is and what he could become under Jesse Minter. So let me give you the full breakdown on Deane Leonard. So first of all, Deane Leonard, he's 24 years old and he's actually from Calgary, played at Calgary University from 2017 to 2019 before transferring to Ole Miss for 2020 and 2021. He didn't have a lot of ball production in college, only 11 pass deflections at Ole Miss in 19 games, and he also allowed a 68.3 completion percentage, but he had the athletic tools and he flashed some really good traits. He has some deep ties to the Canadian Football League because his dad played 7 years for the Calgary Stampeders, and he himself could have been in the CFL because he was drafted 18th overall in the CFL draft in 2021, but he decided to continue playing at Ole Miss, and that gamble, it paid off because he was drafted in the 7th round by the Chargers in 2022, obviously. But now, let's start off his Chargers career, because his first preseason game in 2022 was against the Rams, and he was getting roasted by all the Chargers fans because he allowed 2 catches, one being that 60-yard touchdown catch to Lance McCutcheon down the sideline and then missing the tackle. He also had a pass interference in the end zone. Looking back at this game, he was in good position for most of the time, but he just needed to learn to get his head around to avoid getting penalized and then also be able to track the ball and swat it away. He had very little ball production in college at both Calgary and Ole Miss, and you could immediately see why as soon as he got into the NFL. Now that year, 2022, he didn't play basically at all. Like, he only had 4 snaps in the 2 games that he played, and they were all running plays. So the only action we saw from him that rookie season was the Rams game, and it honestly wasn't that bad. Like, yes, he gave up big plays, but you could see the potential in him because he wasn't out of position on any of these plays. It was just technical things that needs to be fixed going into year 2. I mean, the Chargers knew they would need to develop him because he was a very raw prospect coming out of college, but he is 6 foot, 200 pounds, ran a 4.39 40. So he has all the size and speed that you want at cornerback. He also has really good 10-yard and 20-yard splits. So his closing speed downfield towards the ball carrier in the run game and towards wide receivers when they break out on routes, it's high level. He actually kind of reminds me of a different Chargers cornerback who went undrafted out of BYU, Michael Davis. Here are their RAS scores right here compared to each other, and you can see how similar they are in athleticism and size, but also, honestly, just kind of the way that they play football. Now let's go into 2023, because Deane Leonard, he had a pretty good preseason and was actually the 2nd highest graded Charger in run defense and the 2nd highest graded cornerback in coverage throughout the entire preseason. Against the Rams, you could already see the improvement from last year. Same kind of pass that he had that pass interference on in the last preseason, that he was able to stick with the wide receiver and get his head around in order to avoid that penalty, force the incompletion. He also put up some good tape against the Saints specifically. In that game, he graded as the Chargers' best defender in overall defensive grade, coverage grade, and run defense. He also locked up Quentin Johnston in training camp a couple times from what I saw going back and looking at the training camp highlights. But he was showing a lot of improvement in the second year. Maybe locking up Quentin Johnston wasn't as big of an accomplishment for that training camp. But, it was a pretty big leap for Deane Leonard, honestly. And you could tell that he is a hard worker and he was working on his game in the offseason. And then beginning the 2023 regular season, he didn't see any game action until we got into week 8 against the Bears. He only had 222 snaps last year, and the bulk of them came against the Lions, the Ravens, and the Patriots, where Michael Davis was not really playing most of the time. So that's where most of the film that you're going to see from him is coming from. But he came downfield very fast. He was a very willing tackler. He played zone coverage really well, better than he played man coverage, and he had the speed very clearly to keep up with guys and stay in their hip pocket. And there was one play where he was in zone against the Jets. Zach Wilson threw a corner route behind his zone and right in front of Dean Marlowe's zone, who was the deep safety. It was a good pass, man. It should have been a completion, but Deane Leonard, he came all the way from where he was, and he was able to disrupt the pass before the ball got there. And that, to me, like, he wasn't beat on that play, but it showed the recovery speed, because that was not his responsibility. He went out of his zone in order to go make a play. He also flashed some really good run defensibility at times, where he was taking really good angles to the ball and was willing to hit the runner like pretty hard, especially for a cornerback. And I thought he actually played his best ball as a nickel cornerback, surprisingly. Like, he was able to recognize fade routes from that nickel spot really, really well. He was never fooled from what I saw. And he had that speed to take away the slot receivers while also being big and physical enough to take on the tight ends. He absolutely locked up Jamison Williams in that Lions game, and he even had some good coverage plays against Amon-Ra St. Brown. He was able to break on those out routes really, really well. His back pedal, his change of direction, it was so fluid and fast. He is such a seamless mover, and you can easily see why the Chargers drafted him. But now let's get into the negatives from last year, because I thought he was pretty good in zone coverage, but just not really as good in man, because he tends to just be too physical at times, not with like his hands, but by leaning into the receivers and still just not getting his head around, not tracking the ball. He had 2 pass interferences last year because of that. And then in the run game, he was so inconsistent with his angles, like seriously, to the ball carrier. He would fly downfield and not allow much yardage, while other times he would just take a really horrible angle to the ball and allow the runner to get to the edge, or just like flat out miss a tackle, which, I mean, you know, guys are going to miss tackles. This is the NFL. Guys are elusive and tough to tackle, but you don't want to see the bad angles to the ball as often as you did. And now we get into a little bit of the Brandon Staley effect here, because he got beat towards the inside way more often than I'd expect for a guy who played his best ball in the slot. I have to wonder if that is because he was hesitant to go towards the inside of the field because of that Brandon Staley scheme that demanded a lot of like thinking and processing of what is happening during the play from these cornerbacks and from these safeties, and it just made him stop and think. Like, this is a young cornerback. You don't want to put him in a really complex scheme like that, especially in his first real NFL action. Like, I saw a lot of plays where he looked hesitant to trust his instincts, and some plays where a coverage was blown and I didn't know who was at fault, because there are like 2 guys doing different things. Either they're not communicating with each other, or someone is reading the coverage wrong. Like, I have no idea. That is more on Staley than any of these cornerbacks, I think. And Deane Leonard, actually, in that Brandon Staley scheme, graded as the Chargers' 3rd best cornerback last year, behind Asante Samuel Jr. and Essang Bassey, bro. What? But he graded better than Michael Davis, J.C. Jackson, Jasir Taylor, you know, everybody else. He also got beat on vertical routes sometimes, especially against the Ravens. Like, that was his worst game of the year. Zay Flowers and Odell Beckham, they seemed like too quick for him. But again, this guy's a 4.3 40 athlete. They are not too quick for him. They're not too fast. I just think that he was hesitant in that scheme and not playing as fast as he really can. He had some good reps in the preseason as well as the regular season, but there was just like so much inconsistency that plagued really the entire Chargers DB room. It's tough to get a full grasp of like how well he played individually last year. And it's because of that that I went and watched some of his special teams reps, because he flashed there as well. So that's a good sign that he's at least going to be a contributor. But he had some good reps as a gunner. And on the punt return team, he was able to create some space for Darius Davis to have some good returns as well. But he was also inconsistent in this area, because there was one play where he let the gunner just run right by him in the Jets game, and he didn't allow Darius Davis to return the ball because that guy was right in his face, and there was so much room for him to work with. It cost the team like 20 yards in field position. And then there was another play where he was the gunner against the Jets again. He could have downed the ball inside the 5, but he couldn't turn his head around and locate the ball, so it just went into the end zone. That cost the team again another like 20 yards in field position. So now you can see like the things that are hurting him as a cornerback, they're also hurting him at special teams. He can't really get his head around, needs to be able to track the ball better, but the athleticism is there, the size is there, and now most importantly, the coaches are there to help bring out the best in him. And like Jesse Minter said, he has already progressed nicely throughout minicamp and the OTAs. So let's see what he's going to be able to do next year. And if you want to see another athlete who could possibly develop, you should check out this video right here. This is another 4.3 40 guy.